Welcome back, viewers. You are still tuned into Prime Live. We now know that Gauteng residents are in for a summer of water shortages as well as possible water shedding as we look forward to some of the hottest days of the year. This weekend, Bulk Water Utility and Rand Water actually sent out a warning to municipalities of looming water supply shortages. City councils have also been urged to repair leaks, enforce laws and address illegal connections. Now, the real question is the looming water crisis due to low reservoir levels, or is it due to the water system that needs urgent repairs? And at what point does high demand become the reason why our taps run dry? Can a day zero actually be avoided in South Africa's economic hub? Joining us now to help us answer all of these questions on how we got here is the manager at JoburgCAN and a member of Johannesburg Water Forum, Julia Fish. Good evening, Julia. Thank you so much for joining us on Prime Live.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, this is an important conversation for us to get started on because a lot of us are really scared about the idea of having water shortages or water shedding. How much of a disaster is it that, according to the No Drop report, municipalities waste up to 33% of piped water due to the leakages and the illegal connections?
Just to clarify, the total in the country is about 47.6% that's being lost. And of that, about 25% of that is just leaks in the city of Joburg. Non-revenue water, that 47.6% that I spoke about, is basically water that is lost before it gets to the consumer or it's not collected as revenue. But really what those figures do is deepen the trust deficit between the municipality and its residents who aren't doing their part in the water crisis if they feel the city isn't doing theirs.
Thank you so much for clarifying that and for sharing that insight as well. But let's talk about how seriously is the problem that we are seeing now. I know that Rand Water is, giving some warnings when it comes to a looming water crisis, but how serious is this problem at the moment?
It is a genuine concern, but it's not a new thing. This is a seasonal reality that we go through every year, and we have the same challenges when we get to spring and summer. But the ailing infrastructure is making this worse. The city has not spent enough on pipeline replacement, which is supposed to be at about 8% of the asset value, but in reality, they're only doing about 3%. They aren't repairing enough of the system, and it's at that point that there is only money allocated to do less in 5 years what they should be doing in just a single year. So also Rand Water must remember that the delay in the Lesotho Highlands project phase 2 was supposed to be online by now. And this would have made things a bit better as the root cause of the strain to the system now is inaction for years by many municipal entities.
Now let's talk about worst case scenarios. How acute, in your prediction, could these water shedding or water outages be potentially, and how at risk are we of reaching a day zero?
To be 100% frank, day zero is probable. It is something that has been spoken about for a few years, especially given the challenges of climate change, and that we know from multiple reports that the way we're going to experience catastrophic climate change is through water, be it floods or droughts. And the combination of climate and infrastructure does put a huge strain on our system. And we also have to think about the unique geography of Johannesburg. With no major singular water source surrounding it, it's always meant that this is kind of likely. But this statement, in my opinion, is actually irresponsible. And it shows the breakdown more in the relationship between Joburg Water and Rand Water than it does about the current water crisis. What should have happened here is both parties met and decided on a way that we can prevent this from happening, rather than putting out a statement that has really caused a lot of panic.
Thank you for sharing that. I mean, that is a very scary reality for any South African to be able to hear, that a day zero is absolutely possible. I mean, we've just overcome the hurdle of load shedding, and now the whole idea of water shedding, I think, is really making South Africans feel very, very uncomfortable. And something that South Africans have wanted in the new government and within the GNU is more accountability. So I think that's what leads to my next question is who is responsible for the water management in South Africa? And a lot of people are also saying, I saw on X that there's a lot of conversation about how much of water actually gets wasted that we already have in terms of the lack of maintenance on our infrastructure, that the water actually gets wasted. So who actually within government is responsible for the water management as well as the administration of our water?
I just want to pick up on something that you said there, that people have just come out of load shedding and are now concerned about water shedding. For a lot of people in the city of Joburg, this is already a reality. Their taps have run dry for almost 2 years now. There's been a cycle specifically with certain reservoirs like Alexander and the Hurst Hill 2 reservoir, that this has been a reality for a lot of residents for some time. They've been battling with the municipality to repair their reservoirs. And in that, we've also discovered that 42 of the reservoirs in the city of Joburg are leaking. That's a huge problem. Yeah. So restrictions and really placing the onus on residents is not helpful because, like I said earlier, there is that trust deficit, and they're not going to come to the party unless they feel that the city is as well. But if we're looking at who's responsible, everyone has a role to play. All spheres of government have a responsibility. The Lesotho Highlands Water Project, which I mentioned earlier, is delayed because of previous corruption in the departments until 2019. Municipalities, according to policy, are the most responsible, but municipalities do not have the capacity alone to fix things. So to give the urgency, given that really Johannesburg is the economic hub of the country, it has to be all spheres of government. Everyone has to come to the table, but so do us as citizens. So we really have to promote change from within and step up how we feel and our relationship with water looks like.
Now, speaking to that call of action and call to action that everyone is responsible, even South Africans in general and the general public, that we have a responsibility to use water wisely and to try to save as much as we possibly can. Now, like you said, there are already water restrictions in places across Johannesburg as well as Tshwane. And looking back at the load shedding, I recall growing up and seeing, these ads pop up on TV to switch off unnecessary lights, and this huge call to action for the general public to play their part, as you say, and switch off unnecessary lights. Do you think that this looming idea of a water crisis and the already existing water cuts and water restrictions in areas across South Africa is enough to motivate the general public to play their part and save as much water as possible?
Unfortunately, people at this point don't have money. There's huge strains on people's purses. And when it comes to tariff increases and what's been happening in that sphere, people are really struggling. So the restrictions do play a part because people won't go over the consumption to which they can afford. And for a lot of households, that's very little. Though we do get 6 kiloliters of free basic water in the city of Joburg, that doesn't actually help large multi-generational households. So restrictions are a start, but if they're not enforced, then it does not matter if they are more stringent. With restrictions, there needs to be a way to monitor the large users to see how they are saving as well. A name and shame of excessive users, in my opinion, is a start. And what people really want as well is responsible development planning that takes water availability into account.
Now, something you mentioned early on in our conversation is that water security is an issue that isn't new to South Africa and new to particularly Gauteng because of the landscape and the geography and the lack of available water in the area. What do you think South Africa can do better to ensure water security?
Like I said, the city of Joburg hasn't got an immediate massive water source that we can continue to draw from and not face the consequences. That's why there are these restrictions on how much Rand Water, as they said in their statement, can draw. It's also looking at the long-term viability of us being able to secure a water source. So we also then need to think of drinking water as exactly that, a massive treatment process, that it has to be drawn down, go through a treatment plant, be actually declared safe for drinking, and then go through thousands of kilometers of pipeline to reach us. So that water that's been treated and is beautifully, perfectly safe to drink, and we're very lucky to have the quality of water that we do, in a lot of the municipalities. That should be treated as just that, a very significant resource. And pouring drinking water down our toilets, putting it on our lawns, covering our cars in it, is not a responsible water use. We should be using grey water storage. We should be treating all sources well, including boreholes. You know, when we're looking at groundwater and how that should be treated with respect, that is also an element of it. Just if you have a borehole, don't go around running around washing your car and almost laughing in the face of your neighbors who have no water. It's this relationship that we as South Africans have to really embrace, that water is scarce, that it is our responsibility to be on the front lines of protecting it and ensuring the ecological safety of our future, but also that even when we see other people doing wrong, it doesn't promote that we can then go around doing worse. When day zero was imminent in Cape Town, everyone stepped up, put little measures on their taps. They stored grey water in their showers. They restricted themselves to 50 kiloliters of water a day for a family. And that's the kind of attitude we need to have. But like I said, governments, the municipalities, Rand Water need to come to the table and reduce those 25% leaks in the city of Joburg.
I think what you've addressed just there is incredibly important. When it comes to things like load shedding and water shedding and things like that, I do think that the general public need to adjust their attitude towards it. And I think because the South African government have let us down more than once, the general public tend to feel rebellious when it comes to things like that. And like you said, do careless things with water and waste water unnecessarily, particularly drinking water. But we have a unique opportunity now. What would be your call to action to South Africans who are watching us right now? And more importantly, your call to action for South African government in order to address this looming issue?
It's very difficult to tell people when their taps are empty and when they're struggling with nightly shut-offs or the water coming out of their taps not being reliable, that they must save water and that they're the problem. A lot of the communication coming out of most of these municipalities and spaces is that it's high demand. And people don't believe that because they drive down the streets, they walk through the streets, and they see water pouring down the drain. And that really angers people. So I understand why there is this rebellious nature. I completely understand it, and I feel it myself on some days. But really, it's about creating spaces where we are both invited into and initiate ourselves to ensure that we stop playing the blame game through multi-faceted media reports that fly between all the entities on a daily basis, and actually start listening to solutions. And therefore, when we meet each other halfway, we're really going to get some really great responses. I think citizens want to participate. They want to be the solution. Government wants to. They just need to align their budgets with our heartstrings.
Julia, thank you so much for joining us this evening, as well as sharing your insights and information on this looming crisis. I know that having this conversation was very important for South Africans and our viewers at home to be able to understand the severity of what is potentially at hand, and that day zero is very much, in fact, a possibility. So thank you for sharing your time with us this evening.
Day zero is a probability, not just a possibility, so we need to step up. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much for sharing. Viewers at home, that was Julia sharing insights about the looming water crisis that we have been warned about. And as she said, with absolute certainty, day zero is absolutely possible. And like she said, yes, we all understand the rebellious nature and the rebellious feeling we have towards these things like load shedding, as well as a potential water shedding that is coming and is already being inflicted upon communities all across South Africa, that we need to adjust our attitudes, play our part, and save water where we can. We saw day zero hit Cape Town and the Western Cape, and it is absolutely a possibility for Gauteng as well. We saw how the people were able to rally together and do what they can to save water. So it is in our hands as well to do our part and play our part as well. But viewers at home, you can let us know your thoughts on our social media platforms. If you have been affected by an area that has been subject to water shedding, please do share with us on our social media platforms. And if you have have been a water saver and you have jumped on board the bandwagon to play your part in saving water, please also do share with us on our social media platforms so we can spread and share the message and teach others and share with others how we can do our part to save as much water as possible to prevent day zero. But do let us know and engage with us on all our social media platforms. But on that note, it is time for us to head over to an ad break and we'll come right back.